You lied under oath, officer. Tell the court the truth. Who is she? The judge's voice thundered across the room, silencing even the faintest shuffle of papers. Every head turned toward Daniel Carter, a man once revered for his badge and authority, now standing frozen in the witness box. His wife, Rebecca, stormed to the prosecutor's table, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. With one swift motion, she hurled a thick file onto the surface, its contents spilling out like secrets too long buried. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as eyes darted between Rebecca, Daniel, and a young black woman seated near the back, Keisha Robinson. Her presence was electric, yet her posture betrayed unease. Daniel's mouth opened but no words came out. Sweat beaded on his brow, his composure cracking under the weight of accusation. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. You've hidden behind that uniform long enough, Daniel. Today, we expose the truth. She locked eyes with him, her gaze unwavering. For the first time in years, Daniel felt powerless, trapped by the very lies he'd spun so meticulously. As whispers filled the room, all eyes shifted to Keisha, who seemed caught in an invisible storm. What did she know? And how deep did this betrayal run? Keisha sat rigid, her fingers gripping the edge of the bench as though it might anchor her to reality. The air in the courtroom felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken truths and mounting hostility. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. She could feel the stares boring into her, dissecting her every movement, searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. Daniel, meanwhile, struggled to compose himself. His usual commanding demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a man visibly unraveling. He glanced at Keisha, pleading silently for understanding, or perhaps silence, but found only fear reflected in her wide, trembling eyes. The atmosphere grew oppressive, the collective judgment of the room pressing down on them both. A journalist scribbled furiously in the corner, capturing every detail for tomorrow's headlines. Nearby, a juror whispered to another, their expressions grim. It was clear, Daniel's carefully constructed world was teetering on the brink of collapse. Rebecca stood tall, her confidence radiating as she addressed the judge. Your Honor, these documents will prove not just infidelity but something far more insidious, a pattern of abuse rooted in prejudice. Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Keisha flinched, realizing the magnitude of what was about to unfold. She wanted to disappear, to escape the spotlight threatening to consume her. Yet, deep down, she knew there was no turning back now. As the tension reached its peak, Rebecca reached for the folder again, her hands steady despite the chaos swirling around her. Whatever lay inside those pages would change everything, for Daniel, for Keisha, and perhaps for the entire system they represented. Rebecca opened the folder with deliberate precision, pulling out a series of emails, photographs, and testimonies. Each document was a thread unraveling the tapestry of Daniel's deceit. This, she began, holding up a printed email, is proof of Officer Carter's discriminatory practices within the department. Not only has he abused his power, but he's also perpetuated systemic racism under the guise of law and order. The room erupted into gasps. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched tight. He tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a single raised hand. Rebecca continued, her voice steady and resolute. And this, she held up a photograph of Daniel with Keisha, taken during one of their clandestine meetings. Is evidence of his affair with Ms. Robinson, a relationship built on manipulation and exploitation. Keisha's breath hitched as the photo was passed around the courtroom. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though her private life had been stripped bare for public consumption. Daniel shot her a look filled with desperation, but she couldn't meet his gaze. Instead, she stared at the floor, her mind racing with memories of their encounters, the promises he'd made, the trust she'd misplaced. Rebecca pressed on, revealing testimonies from victims of Daniel's misconduct. One account described how he'd falsified reports to justify targeting innocent black men. Another recounted how he'd used racial slurs during interrogations. Each story added fuel to the fire burning in the courtroom. For the first time, Daniel appeared small, diminished by the sheer force of truth crashing over him. His colleagues in the audience shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact altogether. Meanwhile, Rebecca exuded strength, her actions reclaiming the dignity stolen by years of betrayal. Keisha watched silently, torn between guilt and anger. She realized now that she wasn't just a pawn in Daniel's game, she was a symbol, a living testament to the injustices embedded in society. The realization ignited something within her, a spark of defiance flickering to life. But before she could act on it, Rebecca turned to address her directly. "Ms. Robinson," Rebecca said softly yet firmly, "the choice is yours. Will you stay silent, or will you help us dismantle the system that protects men like him?" Keisha swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She didn't respond, not yet, but the question lingered in the air, unanswered and unresolved. Keisha rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. All eyes were on her now, waiting for her next move. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she stepped forward. "I can't stay silent anymore," she began, her voice quivering but determined. "Officer Carter used me, took advantage of my trust, and twisted it to serve his agenda." Her words reverberated through the courtroom, each syllable laced with raw emotion. "He told me he cared, that he wanted to change. But everything he said was a lie. Behind closed doors, he's the same man who abuses his badge to oppress people who look like me." Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to let them silence her. Daniel listened, his expression shifting from shock to shame. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no one paid him any heed. The tide had turned, and Keisha was no longer the frightened woman sitting quietly in the shadows. She was a whistleblower, exposing not just Daniel but the rot festering within institutions meant to protect. "I have recordings," she admitted, her voice growing stronger. "Recordings of him admitting his biases, bragging about how easy it is to exploit the system. If anyone doubts me, I'll play them right here, right now." The room fell silent, the gravity of her declaration sinking in. Journalists scrambled to capture her words, while spectators exchanged uneasy glances. Even the judge leaned forward, intrigued by the audacity of her testimony. Rebecca nodded approvingly, offering Keisha a subtle smile of encouragement. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, a united front against corruption and injustice. But as Keisha returned to her seat, the weight of her decision settled heavily upon her shoulders. What would come next? Would her bravery be enough to bring real change? The courtroom descended into chaos as Keisha's confession sank in. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed wildly, and murmurs of outrage rippled through the crowd. Daniel stood alone, abandoned even by his fellow officers, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. His mask of authority had shattered completely, leaving behind a man stripped of dignity and respect. Rebecca seized the moment, addressing the judge with unwavering conviction. "Your Honor, today we've uncovered not just one man's crimes but the systemic failures enabling such behavior. This isn't just about Daniel Carter, it's about accountability. We must demand better from those sworn to serve and protect." Her words resonated deeply, igniting a sense of collective responsibility among those present. Some nodded in agreement, others wiped away tears, moved by the courage displayed by two women fighting for justice. Meanwhile, Daniel's attempts to salvage his reputation fell flat. His protests went unheard, drowned out by the cacophony of voices calling for reform. For the first time, he faced the consequences of his actions, not just legally but morally. As the commotion subsided, the judge called for order, promising swift deliberation. Yet, the damage was done. Daniel's legacy was tarnished, his name synonymous with hypocrisy and cruelty. Outside the courtroom, news outlets broadcasted snippets of the trial, sparking debates about race, policing, and accountability. But amidst the turmoil, Keisha found a glimmer of hope. Though the battle was far from over, she knew her voice mattered. She had started something, a ripple effect that could grow into waves of change. Still, questions lingered. Could she endure the scrutiny? And what sacrifices lay ahead? Months earlier, Keisha had met Daniel under vastly different circumstances. At the time, she saw him as a protector, someone willing to listen when others dismissed her concerns. Their initial conversations were casual, almost friendly, until they crossed a line neither anticipated. Daniel had been charming, persuasive, convincing her that he shared her vision for equality. "Things are changing," he'd assured her. "People like me, were part of the solution." Back then, Keisha believed him. Naively, she trusted his intentions, unaware of the web of deceit surrounding them both. Now, as fragments of their past collided with the present, she understood the truth: Daniel had never intended to change. He'd simply sought to control, to manipulate her ideals for his gain. Yet, even as bitterness crept in, Keisha couldn't ignore the lessons learned. Her journey from innocence to awareness foreshadowed the challenges still ahead. How far would she go to fight for justice? And at what cost? License and registration, now. Officer Daniel Carter's voice cut through the humid night air, sharp as a blade. The black driver hesitated for only a moment before complying, his hands trembling slightly as he handed over the requested documents. "This is about a broken taillight," the driver asked, his tone laced with unease. Daniel leaned closer, his shadow falling over the man like a storm cloud. "It's not just the tail light," he replied coldly. "You were swerving. Acting suspicious." His words carried an unspoken accusation, one that hung heavy in the silence between them. The driver swallowed hard but said nothing more, knowing better than to argue. Daniel's reputation preceded him, a tough enforcer who didn't tolerate excuses. Yet beneath his authoritative demeanor lay something darker, a bias simmering under the surface. To some, he was a protector; to others, a predator hiding behind a badge. As Daniel issued the citation, his radio crackled with another call. He straightened, glancing back at the car before walking away without explanation. The encounter ended, but its weight lingered, not just for the driver, whose heartbeat slowly returned to normal, but also for Daniel, whose actions hinted at deeper truths yet to unravel. At home, Rebecca Carter poured herself a glass of wine, her movements deliberate despite the faint lines of worry etched across her brow. Daniel walked in moments later, still wearing his uniform, though it no longer seemed to command the same respect it once did, even within their own walls. "How was your day?" she asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Same old," Daniel muttered, loosening his tie. "Just doing what needs to be done." Rebecca nodded, but her gaze lingered on him a beat too long. Something felt off: his distracted silences, the unanswered calls during dinner hours, the way he sometimes flinched when she touched his arm. She wanted to believe in the man she married, the man who promised to uphold justice. But cracks were forming, small fissures in the foundation of their marriage. "You've been working late a lot lately," she ventured cautiously. "Is everything okay?" Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I'm fine," he said finally, avoiding her eyes. "Just busy." Rebecca let the subject drop, for now, but her mind raced with questions. What, or who, was keeping him so occupied? Her loyalty wavered ever so slightly, replaced by a gnawing suspicion she couldn't ignore. Keisha Robinson stood at the center of a growing crowd, her voice ringing out with conviction. We're here today because enough is enough. Police brutality isn't just headlines, it's lives destroyed, families torn apart. And we won't stay silent anymore. The protest surged around her, a tide of voices united against injustice. Signs bore messages like, Black Lives Matter, and, No Justice, No Peace, while chants echoed through the streets. Keisha's passion was magnetic, drawing people to her cause. Yet even amid the energy of the rally, tension simmered. Officers lined the perimeter, their presence both a deterrent and a provocation. From a distance, Daniel watched, his arms crossed as he observed the scene. His gaze landed on Keisha, her fiery determination catching his attention. There was something about her, her courage, her defiance, that intrigued him. But it wasn't admiration alone, there was calculation in his stare, a flicker of interest mingled with disdain. Later that evening, Daniel found himself lingering outside the community center where Keisha was speaking. As she addressed a smaller group, her words struck a nerve. Change starts with holding those in power accountable, she declared. And we won't stop until they listen. Her resolve unsettled him, stirring emotions he hadn't expected. For the first time, he questioned whether his methods might have consequences beyond the job. But then again, maybe this was exactly why he needed to keep watching, and waiting. Their first meeting happened by chance, or so it seemed, at a local cafe. Keisha sat alone, sipping coffee and reviewing notes from the protest. Daniel approached hesitantly, his badge tucked discreetly inside his jacket. I saw you speaking last night, he began, his tone softer than usual. You're passionate about your work. Keisha looked up, surprised. Officer Carter, she acknowledged coolly. What brings you here? I wanted to understand, he admitted. Maybe there's more to learn from perspectives like yours. Keisha studied him carefully, unsure whether to trust his sudden interest or dismiss it as manipulation. Still, curiosity got the better of her. They talked for hours, their conversation weaving between shared ideals and stark contrasts. Over time, their meetings became frequent, each encounter charged with tension and unspoken attraction. But guilt gnawed at Keisha. How could she reconcile her feelings for Daniel with everything he represented? One night, after leaving his apartment, she paused outside, staring at the stars. What am I doing? She whispered to herself. Meanwhile, Daniel played his part skillfully, using charm and calculated gestures to keep her close. He knew their relationship was risky, but risks often yielded rewards. Or so he believed. Yet neither realized how fragile their connection truly was, or how quickly it might shatter under scrutiny. Keisha stared at the folder in her hands, its contents damning. Leaked emails revealed Daniel's involvement in covering up misconduct within the department. Testimonies from victims painted a chilling picture of abuse and prejudice. Her stomach churned as she read line after line, each word confirming her worst fears. Daniel wasn't just flawed, he was complicit. Every promise he'd made, every moment of vulnerability he'd shared, suddenly felt tainted. She confronted him later that week, her voice trembling with anger. How could you lie to me? Everything you said, it was all a game, wasn't it? Daniel faltered, caught off guard. Keisha, listen, no, she interrupted, her voice rising. You used me. You manipulated me into believing you cared, all while protecting the very system I'm fighting against. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her expression a mix of betrayal and disgust. I trusted you, she continued, tears welling in her eyes. And now I see you for what you really are. For the first time, Daniel appeared vulnerable, stripped of his usual confidence. But it wasn't remorse, it was fear. Fear of losing control, of being exposed. As Keisha turned to leave, her resolve hardened. She couldn't let this go unpunished. Not just for herself, but for everyone affected by his actions. That night, Keisha sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents and recordings. Each piece of evidence strengthened her case, fueling her determination to expose Daniel's hypocrisy. "I can't do this alone," she murmured, scrolling through contacts on her phone. Her finger hovered over a name before she pressed call. When the line connected, she spoke quickly, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. "I need your help. It's about Officer Carter." On the other end, a pause, followed by cautious agreement. Keisha exhaled, relief washing over her momentarily. This was just the beginning, but already she felt the weight shifting. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the storm brewing within its shadows. Keisha knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but she also knew one thing for certain: silence wasn't an option anymore. And as dawn broke over the horizon, she made a vow, to fight not just for herself, but for the countless others silenced by fear and oppression. "Get your hands where I can see them," Daniel barked, his voice slicing through the quiet street like a blade. The young black man froze, confusion etched across his face as he slowly raised his arms. "I didn't do anything," the man stammered, his voice shaking under Daniel's glare. "That's for me to decide," Daniel shot back, yanking the man's arms behind his back with unnecessary force. The handcuffs clicked into place, and a murmur rippled through the crowd that had gathered. Keisha stood at the edge of the scene, her stomach twisting into knots. She watched as Daniel shoved the man into the patrol car, his movements brimming with hostility. "This isn't about justice, it's about power," she muttered under her breath, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. The onlookers exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering about calling for accountability, others too afraid to speak up. Daniel ignored them all, his focus singular and unyielding. As he slid into the driver's seat, his eyes briefly met Keisha's. For a moment, she thought she saw guilt flicker in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Later that night, Keisha replayed the incident in her mind, anger simmering beneath the surface. Something had to be done, but what? And how could she confront someone who wielded so much authority? Keisha approached Daniel cautiously, choosing her words carefully. "I saw you today," she began, her tone measured but firm. "That arrest, it wasn't right." Daniel stiffened, caught off guard by her directness. "You don't understand the job, Keisha. Sometimes tough decisions need to be made." "Tough decisions," she echoed, incredulous. "Or just convenient excuses? That man didn't deserve what you did to him." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm not proud of everything I've done, okay? But I'm trying to change. You're helping me see things differently." His words were smooth, almost convincing, but something felt off. Keisha hesitated, torn between her growing suspicions and her desire to believe in his redemption. Could someone like Daniel truly change? Or was this another manipulation tactic? "You promise you're working on it," she pressed, searching his face for sincerity. "I swear," he replied, meeting her gaze. "But you have to trust me, Keisha. Trust that I'm better than my past mistakes." For now, she chose to give him the benefit of the doubt, but doubt lingered nonetheless, gnawing at the edges of her faith in him. At home, Rebecca noticed the subtle shifts in Daniel's behavior. He'd been distant lately, skipping meals and avoiding conversations. His phone buzzed incessantly, yet he always stepped away before answering. "Everything okay?" she asked one evening, watching him pace the living room. "Fine," he snapped, then softened. "Just, work stuff." Rebecca frowned, her instincts prickling. There was something he wasn't telling her, something big. She picked up his jacket from the couch, feeling the weight of his badge in the pocket. It had always symbolized safety and order, but now it felt like a barrier between them. As she set the jacket down, her fingers brushed against a crumpled receipt tucked inside. Unfolding it, she saw the name of a hotel she didn't recognize. Her heart sank, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Whatever secrets Daniel was hiding, they were beginning to unravel, and Rebecca feared she wouldn't like what she found. Keisha's questions grew more pointed, her curiosity morphing into outright suspicion. "Why are there so many complaints against you, Daniel? People are saying you target certain communities unfairly." His demeanor shifted instantly, warmth replaced by cold calculation. "Careful, Keisha," he warned, his voice low and menacing. "You don't want to start rumors you can't back up." "I'm not starting anything, I'm asking questions," she retorted, refusing to back down. Daniel leaned closer, his presence suffocating. "And I'm warning you. Keep digging, and you'll regret it. Trust me when I say there are consequences for crossing the wrong people." Fear coiled around Keisha's chest, but anger burned brighter. "Are you threatening me?" she demanded, her voice rising despite herself. "No," he said smoothly, though his eyes betrayed his intent. "I'm protecting us both. Drop it, Keisha. For your own good." She nodded reluctantly, masking her defiance with silence. But inside, resolve hardened. Daniel had revealed his true colors, and Keisha knew she couldn't let him get away with it. One night, Keisha followed Daniel to a dimly lit alley after receiving an anonymous tip about misconduct. What she witnessed shattered any lingering illusions she'd clung to. A teenage boy cowered against the wall, his hands raised in surrender. Daniel loomed over him, shouting accusations that made no sense. "You think you're above the law? Huh? Answer me." Before the boy could respond, Daniel struck him, a brutal punch that sent the teenager sprawling to the ground. Blood trickled from his lip as he whimpered, pleading for mercy. Keisha's breath hitched, her body frozen in horror. This wasn't just bias, this was cruelty masked as authority. Tears blurred her vision as she realized the full extent of Daniel's hypocrisy. When the beating finally stopped, Daniel dragged the boy to his feet, shoving him into the patrol car. Only then did he glance toward the shadows where Keisha hid. Their eyes locked briefly, and she saw it, the same flicker of guilt she'd glimpsed before, magnified tenfold. She fled the scene, her mind racing. How could she have been so blind? Every lie, every false promise, it all came crashing down around her. Back at her apartment, Keisha sat trembling, replaying the events in her mind. The image of the boy's battered face haunted her, fueling her determination. Daniel wasn't just a flawed individual, he represented a system built on oppression. And if she didn't act, who would? By morning, Keisha had made her decision. She reached out to contacts within the activist community, sharing fragments of what she'd uncovered. "We need proof," one ally urged. "Something undeniable." Keisha nodded, already formulating a plan. She would gather evidence, recordings, testimonies, anything that could expose Daniel's crimes. The risks were enormous, but the stakes were higher. "This isn't just about him," she reminded herself aloud. "It's about everyone who's suffered because of people like him." Her resolve steadied, tempered by the knowledge that standing up meant risking everything. Yet even as fear lingered, hope burned brighter. Change was possible, but only if someone dared to fight for it. As she stepped outside, ready to take the first step, Keisha whispered a silent vow. No matter the cost, she would ensure Daniel's actions didn't go unpunished. Justice demanded nothing less. "This ends now," Keisha declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She stood across from Daniel, who leaned against the wall with an air of casual menace that made her skin crawl. "Ends," he echoed, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think you can just walk away after everything we've been through?" "We haven't been through anything," she shot back, anger burning past her fear. "You manipulated me, lied to me, and used me to protect your image. I'm done being your pawn." Daniel straightened, his expression hardening. "Careful, Keisha. You don't want to make enemies where you can't afford them." Her breath hitched at the thinly veiled threat, but she refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said firmly, though her heart raced. He took a step closer, his presence suffocating. "You should be," he murmured, his eyes cold and calculating. "People like you always regret crossing people like me." Keisha clenched her fists, holding her ground even as doubt crept into her mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear, resolve. Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, poring over documents handed to her by the private investigator. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Daniel's duplicity: hotel receipts bearing unfamiliar names, cryptic text messages exchanged late at night, and photos capturing him in compromising situations. Her hands trembled as she read through the texts. "Who is she?" Rebecca whispered aloud, her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. The investigator cleared his throat. "Based on what we've gathered, it looks like this woman has ties to activist groups challenging police misconduct. If she speaks out," he left the sentence unfinished, letting the implications hang heavy in the air. Rebecca's mind raced. Daniel had sworn to uphold justice, yet here was proof of his hypocrisy, not just in his infidelity but in his actions as an officer. The realization stung more deeply than any personal slight ever could. She reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number she needed. "I need answers," she said when the call connected. "And I won't stop until I get them." As she ended the call, Rebecca felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Whatever it took, she would expose the truth, and hold Daniel accountable for every lie he'd told. When Keisha arrived at Rebecca's doorstep, her face was pale but resolute. "We need to talk," she said simply, stepping inside before Rebecca could respond. They sat facing each other, the tension between them palpable. "I know about us," Rebecca began hesitantly. "About Daniel, and you." Keisha flinched but nodded. "It's worse than you think," she admitted, pulling out a folder filled with recordings and documents. "He's not just unfaithful, he's dangerous. These prove he's abused his power to silence victims and cover up misconduct." Rebecca listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to fury as Keisha recounted every detail. By the time she finished, tears streamed down Rebecca's face, not just for herself, but for everyone affected by Daniel's actions. "How could I have been so blind?" Rebecca murmured, clutching the evidence tightly. "You weren't the only one," Keisha replied softly. "But we can't let him keep getting away with it. Together, we can stop him." For the first time, Rebecca saw Keisha not as a rival but as an ally, a partner in the fight for justice. Their shared pain forged an unspoken bond, one that promised strength in unity. The scandal broke overnight, splashed across headlines and social media feeds. "Corrupt cop exposed, Officer Daniel Carter faces allegations of racism and abuse of power," one article read, accompanied by damning excerpts from the leaked evidence. Public outrage erupted almost instantly. Protesters gathered outside the police department, chanting slogans like, "No justice, no peace," and demanding accountability. Meanwhile, internal chaos consumed the department as higher-ups scrambled to contain the fallout. "He'll deny it all," Captain Harris barked during an emergency meeting. "We stick to the narrative, he's a dedicated officer caught in a smear campaign." And if the truth comes out, another officer asked nervously. It won't, Harris snapped. Not if we handle this right. Outside, reporters swarmed anyone associated with Daniel, desperate for statements. Rebecca fielded calls non-stop, her calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside her. They're trying to discredit us, she told Keisha over the phone. But they underestimate how far we're willing to go. Keisha agreed, her voice firm. Let them try. We have the truth on our side, and that's something they can't silence. Rebecca spent days meticulously crafting their legal strategy, poring over every document and recording to build an ironclad case. With Keisha's support, she identified key witnesses willing to testify against Daniel, each account adding another layer to the damning portrait they were painting. This isn't just about revenge, Rebecca explained during one of their late-night planning sessions. It's about dismantling the system that lets men like him thrive. If we win, it sends a message, to him, to the department, to everyone watching, that no one is above accountability. Keisha nodded, her admiration for Rebecca growing with each passing day. What happens if we lose? She asked quietly. We don't lose, Rebecca replied without hesitation. Not when there's so much at stake. Their partnership deepened as they worked tirelessly, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. Yet the emotional toll lingered, sleepless nights, moments of doubt, the constant reminder of everything Daniel had taken from them. Still, neither woman wavered. They knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but they also knew the cost of staying silent was far greater. I never thought I'd find strength like this, Keisha confessed one evening. But seeing you fight, it gives me hope. Rebecca smiled faintly, her gaze unwavering. Then let's give others hope too. Starting with taking down Daniel once and for all. As the trial date approached, Rebecca and Keisha stood side by side, their alliance unshakable. Whatever happens next, Rebecca said, placing a reassuring hand on Keisha's shoulder, we face it together. Keisha nodded, her resolve steadier than ever. This isn't just about us, it's about everyone who's suffered because of people like him. We owe it to them to see this through. Together, they reviewed their final preparations, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. The stakes were impossibly high, but neither woman doubted the importance of their mission. We're ready, Rebecca declared, her voice ringing with conviction. Keisha echoed the sentiment, her heart pounding with anticipation. The courtroom awaited, but this was more than a legal battle. It was a chance to shine a light on systemic injustice and demand change. And as they stepped forward, united in purpose, they carried with them the hopes of countless others counting on them to prevail. Rebecca stormed into the lawyer's office, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Without a word, she slammed a stack of documents onto the desk, her hands trembling with barely contained fury. I'm done, she declared, her voice cutting through the quiet room like shattered glass. He doesn't get to hide behind his badge anymore. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, scanning the papers quickly. This is thorough, he said cautiously. Are you sure about this? Sure. Rebecca echoed, her tone sharp. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That man has lied, cheated, and abused his power for years. It stops now. Her words carried a weight that went beyond personal betrayal, they spoke to something larger, a pattern of injustice she refused to tolerate any longer. As the lawyer began outlining their strategy, Rebecca felt a flicker of hope amidst the anger. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about accountability. And if they succeeded, it could send ripples far beyond Daniel Carter's downfall. But first, they needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would expose not just his hypocrisy but the systemic rot enabling it. Little did Rebecca know, help was already on its way. Keisha sat across from Rebecca in a dimly lit cafe, clutching a small USB drive tightly in her hand. Her knuckles were white, her breathing shallow as she wrestled with the enormity of what she was about to do. "This is everything," Keisha said finally, sliding the drive across the table. "Recordings, texts, emails, it's all there. Proof of who he really is." Rebecca reached for the drive, her fingers brushing against Keisha's briefly. "You're taking a huge risk," she said softly. "Thank you for trusting me." Keisha nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want to believe it at first. I wanted to think he could change. But these," she gestured toward the drive. "They show the truth. The things he's said, the people he's hurt, it's unbearable." Rebecca listened intently, her heart pounding as she imagined the impact such evidence could have. Together, they reviewed snippets of the recordings, each word revealing Daniel's deep-seated prejudices and abuses of authority. "He called one victim garbage," Rebecca murmured, her voice shaking with rage. "How can someone say that and still wear a badge?" "It's not just him," Keisha replied bitterly. "It's the system that lets men like him thrive. But maybe we can change that." Their shared purpose strengthened their bond, transforming two women bound by pain into allies united by hope. With the evidence secured, they knew the fight ahead would be grueling, but quitting wasn't an option. Daniel walked into the precinct, his chest tight with dread. Whispers followed him down the hallway, colleagues exchanging uneasy glances as news of his suspension spread. "What are you going to do?" asked Captain Harris, pulling Daniel aside. "Fight back," Daniel snapped, though his usual bravado faltered under the weight of scrutiny. "They're trying to ruin me because of politics, not facts." Harris hesitated, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. "Look, we'll support you publicly." But privately, he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging heavy in the air. Privately, cracks were forming. Officers whispered among themselves, some questioning whether Daniel's actions reflected poorly on the entire department. Others doubled down, vowing to protect him no matter the cost. "You can't let them win," urged Officer Martinez, one of Daniel's closest allies. "If they take you down, they'll come for all of us next." Daniel nodded, grateful for the solidarity, but paranoia gnawed at him. Were his colleagues truly on his side, or were they biding their time until it became convenient to throw him under the bus? Meanwhile, outside the precinct walls, public pressure mounted. Protesters chanted slogans demanding justice, while journalists dug deeper into Daniel's past. Every revelation chipped away at his carefully constructed facade, exposing the flaws beneath. For the first time, Daniel felt vulnerable, not just professionally, but personally. The walls were closing in, and escape seemed impossible. The protests erupted spontaneously, fueled by outrage over Daniel's misconduct and decades of unchecked police brutality. Thousands poured into the streets, carrying signs emblazoned with messages like "No more lies" and "Justice over fear." At the center of it all stood Keisha, her voice ringing out with unshakable conviction. "We march today not just for ourselves, but for every person silenced by abuse of power," she shouted, drawing cheers from the crowd. Reporters captured every moment, broadcasting speeches and interviews that painted Daniel as a symbol of systemic racism. Social media amplified the movement, hashtags trending globally as stories of similar injustices flooded online platforms. Rebecca watched from the sidelines, moved by the sheer scale of mobilization. "This is bigger than us," she told Keisha during a brief pause. "People are waking up, and they're angry." Keisha nodded, her resolve unwavering. "Good. Let them stay angry. Anger fuels change." Inside the department, tensions ran high. Officers scrambled to distance themselves from Daniel, fearing association with his tarnished reputation. Yet others doubled down, accusing activists of orchestrating a witch hunt. "We're being targeted unfairly," argued one officer during a heated meeting. "Or maybe we're finally being held accountable," countered another, earning stunned silence from the room. As momentum grew, so did the stakes. For Daniel, failure meant disgrace, but for those fighting against him, success represented a chance to dismantle the oppressive systems he embodied. And with each passing day, victory felt closer within reach. In the courtroom, tension crackled like electricity as Daniel's longtime partner, Officer Greg Miller, took the stand. His face was pale, his hands gripping the railing tightly as he prepared to deliver testimony that would shatter whatever remained of Daniel's credibility. "I never thought I'd be here," Greg began, his voice trembling slightly. "But I couldn't live with myself knowing I stayed silent while innocent lives were destroyed." He recounted incidents where Daniel had falsified reports, intimidated witnesses, and used excessive force, all actions covered up by colleagues sworn to uphold justice. "He made us complicit," Greg admitted, his guilt evident. "But I see now that protecting him only perpetuates the problem." Daniel stared at his former ally, disbelief morphing into raw fury. "You're lying," he shouted, rising from his seat. The judge slammed the gavel, silencing him. "Control yourself, Mr. Carter, or I'll have you removed." Greg continued, detailing additional crimes Daniel had committed, including planting evidence to justify arrests. Each revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, eroding any lingering sympathy for the disgraced officer. Outside, the revelations reignited protests, with chants growing louder and more impassioned. "The truth will set us free," demonstrators cried, holding candles aloft in solidarity. For Daniel, the betrayal cut deeper than public humiliation. It stripped him of the one thing he valued above all else, loyalty. Yet even as his world crumbled, the movement against him gained unstoppable momentum. Justice wasn't just knocking, it was kicking down doors, demanding answers long overdue. Media coverage reached a fever pitch, with headlines painting Daniel as the epitome of corruption and racial bias. Once celebrated as a model officer, he was now reviled, a cautionary tale of unchecked power and privilege. Rebecca watched the news unfold, her emotions a mix of triumph and sorrow. "This isn't just about him," she reminded Keisha during a late-night conversation. "It's about everyone who's suffered because of systems like his." Keisha nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen showing protesters marching in unity. "And it's about making sure no one forgets what happened here. Change starts when people refuse to look away." Together, they reflected on the journey ahead. While Daniel's disgrace marked a significant victory, the battle against systemic racism was far from over. Still, there was hope. Hope in the voices rising together, demanding accountability. Hope in the courage of whistleblowers willing to speak out. And hope in the resilience of communities refusing to back down. As dawn broke over the city, Rebecca and Keisha stepped outside, ready to face whatever came next. They weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for a future where justice prevailed over oppression. Daniel sat stiffly in the witness box, his polished badge glinting faintly under the courtroom lights. His lawyer had prepared him relentlessly, drilling confidence into every word he spoke. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. "You claim you've always upheld justice," Rebecca's lawyer began, circling Daniel like a predator sizing up its prey. "Yet we have evidence suggesting otherwise." "I don't know what you're talking about," Daniel snapped, his voice laced with false bravado. "These accusations are baseless." The lawyer smirked, pulling out a small device. "Let's see if that holds true." With a click, the room filled with Daniel's own voice, cold, calculating, and cruel. Asterisk, "They don't deserve leniency. People like them only understand fear." Asterisk gasps rippled through the gallery as the recording played, each syllable exposing the prejudice Daniel had tried so desperately to conceal. His face paled, sweat beading on his forehead as he stammered, that's taken out of context. No, Officer Carter, the lawyer countered sharply. It's exactly as it sounds, a glimpse into the mindset driving your actions. Or should I say, misconduct. Daniel's composure shattered, his eyes darting wildly between the judge, the jury, and the crowd watching him unravel. For the first time, he felt truly powerless, cornered by the very truths he'd spent years burying. As the audio continued, Keisha leaned forward in her seat, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment they'd been fighting for. The truth wasn't just coming to light, it was blazing like wildfire, consuming everything Daniel once stood for. But even as victory loomed, questions lingered. Would this be enough to bring real change? Or was Daniel merely one piece of a much larger puzzle? When Keisha rose to take the stand, the courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to her, waiting for the words she'd rehearsed countless times but never imagined saying aloud. This isn't just about Officer Carter, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor threatening to break through. This is about every person who has ever been dismissed, degraded, or destroyed because of the color of their skin. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. He didn't act alone. Systems enabled him, laws shielded him. And until we confront those systems, nothing changes. Her testimony wove together personal pain and systemic critique, painting a vivid picture of oppression perpetuated not just by individuals but by institutions. He told me he cared, Keisha admitted, her voice cracking slightly. But his actions betrayed his words. He used me, manipulated me, and silenced anyone who dared challenge him. And when I realized the extent of his crimes, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. I knew I couldn't stay quiet. Rebecca watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in her chest. Keisha wasn't just speaking for herself, she was amplifying the voices of countless others who'd been denied justice. The prosecutor leaned in, seizing the momentum. Ms. Robinson, how do you respond to claims that this case is an isolated incident? It's not isolated, Keisha replied firmly. It's part of a pattern we can no longer ignore. If we want accountability, we need transparency. If we want equality, we need action. Her words resonated deeply, sparking murmurs of agreement among spectators. Even some jurors nodded subtly, moved by her conviction. As Keisha stepped down, the weight of her courage hung heavy in the air. The battle wasn't over, but thanks to her bravery, the tide was turning. The judge's gavel struck the bench with finality, silencing the murmurs filling the courtroom. After reviewing the evidence presented, she declared, her tone grave yet resolute, this court finds Officer Daniel Carter guilty of misconduct and perjury. A collective gasp swept through the room as the verdict sank in. For Rebecca and Keisha, it was vindication, a hard-fought triumph against a man who had wielded power recklessly. Daniel slumped in his chair, his face contorted with disbelief. This isn't fair, he muttered, though his protest went unheard amid the commotion. Outside, news outlets scrambled to broadcast the decision, headlines blaring phrases like, justice prevails, and systemic racism exposed. Social media erupted, with hashtags celebrating the verdict trending globally. For Daniel, the fallout was immediate and devastating. Stripped of his badge, ostracized by colleagues, and abandoned by friends, he found himself utterly alone. The authority he'd clung to for so long had vanished, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man he once was. Meanwhile, Rebecca embraced Keisha tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. We did it, Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Keisha nodded, though her expression remained somber. This is just the beginning, she said softly. There's still so much work to do. And as the courtroom emptied, the echoes of justice reverberated far beyond its walls, igniting conversations about accountability and reform that would shape the future. In the weeks following the trial, life transformed drastically for everyone involved. Daniel retreated into obscurity, his name synonymous with corruption and cruelty. Former allies distanced themselves publicly, while private whispers painted him as a cautionary tale. Rebecca, however, emerged stronger than ever. She poured her energy into advocacy work, partnering with organizations dedicated to dismantling systemic racism within law enforcement. Her transformation from victim to victor inspired many, proving that resilience could overcome even the deepest wounds. "I won't let bitterness define me," she told Keisha during one of their frequent meetings. "What happened hurt, but it also taught me the importance of standing up, even when it's hard." Keisha agreed, her resolve unwavering. Together, they navigated the aftermath of the trial, supporting each other as they processed the emotional toll of their journey. Public reaction to the verdict varied. Some hailed it as a landmark moment for justice, while others dismissed it as political theater. Yet amidst the noise, a clear message emerged: silence was no longer an option. For Keisha, the experience solidified her role as a catalyst for change. She organized community forums, shared stories of survivors, and pushed for policy reforms aimed at holding officers accountable. "We can't afford complacency," she emphasized during a speech at a local rally. "Every victory matters, but every failure reminds us why we must keep fighting." Though challenges remained, hope burned brighter than ever. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and sometimes, progress was enough. Keisha's rise as a national figure symbolized more than personal triumph, it represented a movement gaining unstoppable momentum. Media outlets hailed her as a beacon of resistance, highlighting her courage in confronting systemic racism head-on. "She's proof that ordinary people can spark extraordinary change," one journalist wrote, capturing the sentiment shared by millions. Yet Keisha remained grounded, acutely aware of the work ahead. "I'm not special," she insisted during interviews. "I'm just someone who refused to look away. That's all any of us need to do." Her humility resonated deeply, inspiring others to join the fight. Grassroots campaigns sprang up nationwide, fueled by renewed determination to address racial injustice. As she prepared for her next initiative, a nationwide tour aimed at educating communities about police accountability, Keisha reflected on the journey thus far. "This isn't about me," she reminded herself. "It's about everyone who believes in a better future. And as long as there are people willing to fight, there's hope." With that thought, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. "How many more officers like him are still out there?" Keisha asked during a televised interview, her voice cutting through the air with piercing clarity. The question lingered, unanswered yet impossible to ignore. It forced viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and the urgent need for reform. Keisha leaned closer to the microphone, her expression fierce. "Until we hold everyone accountable, not just the ones caught in scandals, we haven't truly achieved justice." Her words struck a chord, sparking debates across social media platforms. Hashtags like #AccountabilityNow and #JusticeForAll trended as audiences grappled with the implications of her message. And as the interview concluded, one thing became clear: the conversation was far from over. Did this story shock you? What would you do if you were in Rebecca's place? Comment your thoughts below. Speech balloon justice isn't just a word, it's a fight. If you believe corrupt cops should be exposed, hit that like button. Thumbs up, share this video with your friends and family to spread awareness about hidden injustices. Incoming envelope. And if you love powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an eye-opening story.